Okay, I think we'll begin. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming this evening, and thank you for attending the third webinar of the series, CAD and Volumetry Software, AI and the NLCSP. First of all, we would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which the college is located. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. In recognition that we are a binational college, we take this opportunity to acknowledge Maori as Tangata Whenau and Treaty of Waitangi partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Together, we restate our shared commitment to advancing Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and Maori health and education. Again, thank you for attending the third webinar of the series. We have two fantastic speakers ready for you this evening. Presentations will be made by Professor Catherine Jones and Dr. Bruno De Muzio. We will have 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for any questions, so if you would mind waiting until the end, we will get to as many of you as we can. All presentations will be recorded and made available via the College NLCSP webpage over the next few days. We ask that you ensure that your microphones are muted and cameras are off during the presentations. So our speakers for today. Professor Catherine Jones is a subspecialist cardiothoracic radiologist based in Brisbane, Australia. She is the Director of Cardiothoracic Imaging at DetectedX and holds the academic title of Adjunct Professor at the University of Sydney. Catherine is the cardiothoracic lead radiologist at iMed Radiology, one of the world's largest radiology networks. She is also clinical chest lead for AI development at Annalise.ai and sits on multiple governance committees, including on the board of the Australian New Zealand Society of Thoracic Radiology. Dr. Bruno De Muzio is a radiologist at the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne, Australia, where he also serves as a co-director of training and a lecturer for Monash University School of Medicine. He has been involved with radiology teaching activities and is a strong supporter of open access education. Radiopedia.org is one of his major passions, where he has been actively contributing to us since 2008. In radiology practice, he has subspecialty interest in neuroradiology, chest, hepatobiliary imaging, and percutaneous interventions such as liver microwave ablation. He obtained his medical degree and radiology training from the Sao Paulo State University in Brazil, followed by further training at the Sao Paulo Federal University and a postgraduate degree in neuro-oncology at Sírio-Libanês Hospital. He completed his clinical and neuroradiology fellowship at the Royal Melbourne Hospital and body imaging fellowship at the Alfred Hospital. And with that, I will hand you over to Professor Jones. I'll stop sharing now. And Catherine, you should be free to go.
Great, thanks very much, Liam. Just let me know when you can see the slides. I apologize in advance. I am in an airport and I'm sorry if there's any announcements during my talk that intrude. Just while we're waiting for that to come up, I wanted to say at the beginning that this is one of many resources that will be available to radiologists preparing to be involved in reporting for the National Lung Cancer Screening Program. And if you are watching this as a standalone webinar, please do look at the other webinars as well. So this is a very quick summary of how we got to this point. Lung cancer is a very common cancer diagnosed across Australia, and we know that it is a leading cause of cancer death for both men and women, and that the outcomes for people who are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, as well as those who live in regional and remote Australia, are definitely worse than the other cohorts. Overall, there's over 8,500 lung cancer deaths per year. We also know that lung cancer, compared to other cancers, is much more likely to be detected at the late stage. And if we compare on this slide, lung cancer, for example, to breast cancer, or even to colorectal cancer, we can see that the percentage of patients diagnosed at stage 4 is significantly higher. We also know, of course, that the later stage of diagnosis is associated with a much poorer prognosis, and the mortality rates are very poor for lung cancer, although they are improving with increased treatment options, for example, the new immunotherapy medications. Now, we know that screening with CT does improve the mortality of patients over time due to lung cancer death. And that includes predominantly smoker cohorts in the evidence that we have in the literature. And that has, of course, led to the eligibility criteria for this program being patients who have a significant smoking history. When we talk about the radiology that we're showing in the National Lung Cancer Screening Program, just to reiterate that we will be doing this with low-dose DT, a non-contrast study, which will be acquired according to the program guidelines. We will be interpreting these images according to the nodule management protocol, which was the topic for last week's webinar. So if you haven't seen that, I strongly recommend reviewing that. It is really important for us to be able to detect the nodules as well as to measure them and to characterize them. And tonight we'll be focusing partially on the measurement aspect, as well as how we can use AI and CAD tools to help us do these tasks. It is really important to note as well that we will be reporting to a standardized template, which will be available shortly for the radiology sector, and that we will be communicating these results to the National Cancer Screening Registry, which is new for us as a radiology sector. So let's jump in now to the meat of tonight's webinar, which is really part one, volumetry. Now, one of the premises of lung cancer screening is to find nodules in the lungs which show malignant features. And based on the features that we have available to us when we interpret the scan, we may recommend either interval imaging for follow-up, specialist referral, or even suggestion of moving forward to sampling, all of which will be determined by the respiratory lung team. But one really key aspect of making these determinations is whether or not there has been interval growth compared to a previous study. And so we have this concept of nodule growth that we need to define, and then we need to be able to give guidance about how to work out the growth pattern. So how have we defined nodule growth for the National Lung Cancer Screening Program? So core to this management, the nodule management pathway, is the core belief or the evidence-based premise that an increase in size of the nodule indicates malignant potential. Now, there are caveats to that, of course. Inflammatory nodules can grow extremely quickly, but we understand that there's a range of growth rates that indicate a high likelihood of malignancy. It is recommended that radiologists who participate in reporting for this program use the nodule volume measurement, or volumetry, as the preferred and recommended method of measuring solid nodules. Now, obviously, we can't do this without using some form of automated software, segmentation software tools. And so that's what the next part of this talk will be about. It's really worth noting when we talk about the volume of a nodule, we have to report this to the nearest whole number of cubic millimeters. So that's something that's going to be in the template. It's also really important to note that for a variety of reasons, a nodule volume can appear to change up to 25%, either more or less, between different studies. That is considered to be within the margin of error for a stable nodule. And that's partially due to the segmentation software, partially due to the positioning of the patient and the positioning of the nodule compared to the voxels acquired by the CT scanner. So we have defined 25% as the minimum increase or decrease between studies for a significant change in the nodule volume. Now let's introduce the concept of volume doubling time, or VDT. This estimates the time for a nodule's volume to double. And so if you extrapolate that as a concept, the shorter the VDT, the faster that nodule volume is growing. The VDT is usually measured automatically through software, and semi-automated software is defined as software which allows you to manually edit the contour of the nodule if you don't agree with the contour which has been assigned by the software. And so we've used the VDT as a threshold within this lung cancer screening program to describe the different growth patterns of a nodule. And these are the the four different types of volumetry-derived nodule growth patterns. We have clearly growing, which is that the nodule has increased more than 25% since the last study, and the estimated volume doubling time is less than 600 days. Slowly growing means that it's increased at least 25%, but that the VDT is more than 600 days. And that has to be over more than one interval of scanning. A stable nodule is a nodule whose volume has not changed 25% or more in either direction, and that the VDT is more than 600 days and not meeting criteria for slow growth. Now, obviously, some nodules do reduce in size over time, and that is defined as a decrease in volume of at least 25% between studies. This information will be made available, of course, in the nodule explanatory notes to allow all of us to be able to do this on a day-to-day basis, as well as in further educational materials. Now, when would we ever want to use a linear measurement of a nodule? Well, there are reasons and appropriate circumstances, but noting at the beginning that linear measurements are less reliable, not only between radiologists, but also the same radiologist on different days, more likely to be inconsistent, even looking at the same nodule. So it's far less reproducible. We also know that when we estimate nodule volume based on linear measurements, we tend to overestimate nodule volume, as the nodules are not usually perfect spheres. But it's really important to remember as well that some nodules are simply not suitable for using volumetry. And this is particularly in the case of nodules which are very irregular in outline, particularly those that are spiculated, or those which may be adjacent to other structures, for example, surrounded by post-obstructive consolidation, where it is very difficult to measure the exact margin on all sides of the nodule. It's also important to notice that there are two other types of nodules which are reportable in the NSCLP, which are not to be used to be measured using volumetry, and that is the atypical pulmonary cyst nodules, as well as endobronchial nodules. The reasons, of course, for them is that the abnormality is difficult to measure using volumetry, and so these have been defined in our nodule management pathway as linear measurements. Now, we know that nodule size does matter when it comes to whether linear or volume measurements are more reliable. And so we know as well that most of the nodules that will be identified in the lung cancer screening program will have a maximum dimension of about 4 to 7 millimeters in diameter. We know that this is the cohort of nodules where linear measurements are most poorly reproducible between different radiologists. And so that's based on different results that have come out from other large screening trials around the world, is why we have ended up opting for recommendations for volumetry. Now, we need to have a corresponding linear column in that table so that we now have definitions of what different types of growth patterns would be if you have to measure a nodule using linear measurements. You can see that there on the screen. Ideally, we'd be using volumetry for all the solid nodules we can, but if not, please refer to the second column there on the right of the page. Now, this is just pulled directly from the explanatory notes of the nodule management pathway, and so this is freely available to everybody once we start the program. So we'll move on now to the second part of the talk tonight, and that's really moving on to talk about artificial intelligence and computer assistant detected software. So I'll start just for a few slides and then I'll hand over to Dr. Demuzio. Artificial intelligence, or AI, has been used in lung cancer screening for multiple different reasons. Obviously, it helps us to detect more of the nodules that are there. And once we have detected the nodules, it helps us to characterize them further. It certainly helps in the measurement of nodules, the volumetry, and to calculate volume doubling time when we have previous studies for comparison. From an organizational and operational perspective, we can import our results immediately into reporting templates, which not only reduces the amount of time it takes for us to do the report, but also reduces the risk of transcription error. It's well recognized that radiologists who use AI or CAD to identify lung nodules in lung cancer screening will miss fewer nodules compared to those who do not use these tools. It is also important to remember, however, that the AI outputs are generally set to a very sensitive threshold, and so they may produce false positive nodules. And it's really important for us as the human in the loop to critique the outputs of the AI or the CAD tool before accepting them into our report. So just to summarize some of the benefits that we'd be able to get from an AI-assisted tool in our lung cancer screening program: reducing the number of missed nodules across the program, more accurate, reproducible, and faster volume measurements, being able to estimate the volume doubling time over serial studies, and overall producing faster reporting. It's also useful to know that the baseline studies, i.e. the first CT that a patient has when they participate in the program, we'll be using the PanCan calculator, and many of the available AI and CAD tools out there on the market today will automatically generate that PanCan percentage for us, which again reduces some of the time and the potential for calculation error by the radiologist. As with every new technology, and particularly in the case of artificial intelligence, there are always risks associated with deploying new software. As I've already alluded to, AI can produce false positive results, but it's also important to remember that it doesn't pick up every single nodule either. You have to remember that these AI tools have been trained on data sets where there'll be some very easy to see nodules, there'll be some really difficult to see nodules as well. And it is very easy to say that it has an overall good performance, but it is the difficult and subtle nodules that we find difficult where we need the most help. And so it's really important to make sure that the AI tool that you use assists you in those difficult cases, because my cat can probably find a 10-centimeter lung mass on a CT. Certainly, very difficult for anyone, human or feline, to pick up something which is, ground glass and adjacent to another structure like a blood vessel. Also important to note, given that we've just been talking about volumetry, that the estimated volume of a nodule can vary between different AI tools. And there are some references at the end of the presentation for anybody who is interested in reading further, some excellent papers examining the reasons for this, including different algorithms for identifying contours of nodules, as well as different algorithms for estimating volume between different slices of a CT. So up to 20% variation simply from using a different AI tool on the exact same nodule in the exact same case. Just as well to remind everybody at this point that we can become very biased in our acceptance of AI, and we become over-reliant on the AI output. And as I continue to say to people, we still need to look at the pictures. We absolutely still have the responsibility of ensuring that the AI outputs are accurate, and we have to make sure that we don't miss anything and that we don't overcall anything either. So we're going to move on to the next part of the presentation here. And just before Bruno takes over, I wanted to say thank you very much to Bruno for putting together this exceptional tool. I'll let him explain how he did this, but it's absolutely phenomenal. And I certainly would be recommending it to everybody as a tool to be using when approaching the task of choosing an AI tool to use for the lung cancer screening program. So Bruno, I'll let you take over.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you very much. Yeah, you're right. The tool looks much better on the paper rather than me presenting that, but let's try to at least navigate through and introduce you guys to that. So when choosing AI tool for lung cancer screening, of course, everyone is pretty much aware the main topics to approach. Of course, the tool accuracy, and then with that, checking the literature review, and if there's been pilot tests on local cases for that particular algorithm. We also have to assess the tool functionality in terms of how good the tool is in detection, measurement, and also, as Catherine assessed, even with the volume doubling time, if you can do those advanced assessments. Also, if there's some integration with the PanCan estimators or integration with the templated report that we are proposed within the National Cancer Screening. Of course, technical factors in terms of deployment in your institution and how easy to use the tool is very important. So it can be a bit confusing when you have all those topics to cover. So based on that, we did some research of the literature, and we came across an European model, which is called the CLARE framework. Can you just move to the next slide, please? So, and then we adapted that framework to the needs, to the local needs in Australia, in particular for the lung cancer screening guidelines. And then the idea of these checklists is to have a more systematic, evidence-based approach when you are deciding which tool to purchase or to subscribe for nodule detection. Can you move to the next one, please? To effectively evaluate an AI tool, we focus on 5 key areas: clinical performance, regulatory compliance, workflow integration, financial feasibility, and local validation. So these are the checklist main chapters, and then there'll be 25 questions that you can go through, and then we will aid you based on multiple papers, guide you to choose the best tool for your service, for your institution. Can you move to the next one, please? The first step in assessing clinical performance, we should ask what problem does the particular AI tool address. Is only flagging, nodule detection, which would be the very simple tool, or goes further with volumetric measurement, volumetric doubling time, or go even further with full integration with template reports or risk stratification. We need to assess who will be benefiting of the tool. Of course, patients always benefit from that, but we want to make sure that radiologists are benefit from improving diagnostic accuracy and efficiency, and ultimately the institutions have optimized workflows and outcomes. We must also carefully consider the risks related to a particular AI tool. As Catherine pointed out, there are potential risks related to that, particular misdiagnosis when a nodule is very tricky to pick, or ground glass, or close to a vessel, overdiagnosis, false positives, and if the tool is not fully integrated, can be a bit of disruptive to a normal workflow in a radiology practice. Next one. Validation of the tool is critical. We need to ensure that particular AI model is trained on appropriate data sets. Remember, we will be screening patients between 50 and 70-year-old patients that are or smokers, so lungs might have some anatomical distortion with emphysema. So it's important to see if the tool that you are selecting was training in part of that population, not only young patients. Also, the tool needs to account for image variability, in particular with the variability in low-dose CT acquisition techniques. And the tool should have been proven itself by rigorous external validation. That's an important thing to address. With that in mind, be aware that there'll be bias in every particular tool. And you have to have the critique to assess, does the tool perform equally well across diverse population, the population that we are screening. Next, please. And moving to the next chapter of the checklist would be for any AI tool to be used clinically, it must comply with regulatory requirements, which means in Australia having TGA clearance, which is mandatory. But more than that, we need to be concerned about data protection and ethical considerations. We should ensure that the tool has adhered to Australian data protection laws. And as most of the vendors will be probably selling this same software elsewhere in the world, it's also to see if there is adherence to global standards, in particular the American AGI-PAA or the European regulation in the same sense. Next, please. An AI tool is only valuable if it integrates seamlessly into existing workflows. So it's mandatory that any particular tool sold to you has full compatibility with your PACS RIS platforms. We don't want to end up with an algorithm that demands the radiologist extra 10 or 15 clicks to get the AI to work for him. In the same sense, it's important to identify adjustments on the report workflow to integrate that particular tool. In particular, the automation that tool might have in integrating with a report. Next one, please. Infrastructure considerations are often overlooked, but are crucial. We highly recommend that your IT department is involved since the beginning when deciding to purchase a AI model. This because there are lots of circumstances that needs to be considered. For instance, if the data will be processed on premises or cloud-based, if there'll be any requirement for the hardware or network adjustments. And another point is also the tool should have full compatibility with DICOM imaging standard, allowing the data to be exported across different institutions and to the center that will be collecting all the register. Next one, please. From a financial perspective, cost effectiveness should be key. I think that will be very particular for every practice or institution. The model that will be the business case for the purchase of the tool, if it's a one-time fee, subscription-based model, or pay-per-use. We don't recommend any particular one. But the most important thing is to be aware about the potential scalability of that agreement, because there might be variations of the amount of scans that you might be going through. For instance, in the first rounds of screening, we are expecting a large volume of patients. In the same sense, it's important that on your business agreement, training and support is granted, and most importantly, maintenance to allow that the tool receives any future update and remains functional and effective if the guidelines are updated as well. Next one, please. Even if a tool performs well on external published studies, it's a crucial component that we decide to put in this checklist that you have to consider the future local validation, which is very essential. That goes back when we correlate to the data set that the tool has been trained. So we will be then applying that tool in a different data set. So it'll be Australia, lung cancer screening. So the annual or frequent validation will be very crucial to assure that the tool perform reliably in the real-world screening. And in the same sense, it's important to have ownership of the data, in particular if the agreement it's a cloud-based agreement. So you have to be complete ownership to have that data for this internal validation and also for potential research publications. And with that, I think that's the last chapter of the checklist. So the checklist on paper is much easier to go. And it's just a guidance based on multiple papers that we reviewed that shared some frustration and experience when choosing a particular AI model in radiology. I think this slide is pretty much what I summarized, and I might just hand it back to you, Catherine, if you don't mind.
Yes, that's no problem. Thanks, Bruno. So that full checklist will be published in the next couple of months from the college after it's gone through usual college governance. Now, in terms of what happens after you've decided to choose a particular AI or CAD tool to help you do the lung cancer screening program reporting, what do you do then? So this is post-implementation, and sometimes it's called post-market surveillance. And there's a responsibility not just on the part of the AI vendor, but also on part of the users, and that's us and our operational managers in our clinics, to make sure that we check that it continues to function properly, and that not only does it function well at the beginning of the program, but that it stays functioning well over the duration of the program. As Bruno's already said, there's a well-recognized phenomenon that AI tools perform really well in the in vitro testing to achieve regulatory clearance and then may underperform in real-world practice. And there's a number of reasons for that, including differences between the validation data sets as well as the real-world data sets, and differences in your patients compared to the patients that were trained, that the model was used to train on. So that's why this local validation is really important, to make sure that we do this at the start of a deployment, as well as then ongoing accuracy checks and benchmarking against clinical outcomes. And obviously in this instance, when we're talking about lung cancer screening, we go back to those principles of screening and the benefits that AI will be able to give to us. And that's detection, measurement, and characterization of nodules. Really important to note as well that AI tool, like any other piece of software, undergo updates, and it's at that point, if there's a major update, it might be worth considering rechecking the performance of the updated model on your validation set. So it's a good idea to put together a small or not so small validation set within your own institution where you have reviewed the cases and you've ground truthed them internally, and use that as a benchmark for any major updates of your tool. So I'm just going to summarize what we've talked about so far, and then that gives us plenty of time for some questions at the end. Volumetry really is not just the preferred, but is the recommended method for measuring solid nodules in the National Lung Cancer Screening Program. There will be some instances where linear measurements are needed, and that is particularly for those subtypes of nodules that are atypical pulmonary cysts, endobronchial nodules, and those ill-defined non-solid nodules that are difficult to define margins. We know that semi-automated volumetry is the ideal because it allows not only accurate and reliable estimates of the nodule volume, but also of nodule volume doubling time, and it allows the radiologist, or perhaps our radiographers, depending on our workflow, to interact with the automated contours of the nodule and to correct them if needed. This is a key component of how we define growth of a nodule in the National Lung Cancer Screening Program. Moving on to the AI and CAD tool part of the presentation, we know that there are benefits in using these pieces of software so that we miss fewer nodules in lung cancer screening, that our measurements are better in terms of reproducibility and accuracy. We also know that when we use these tools, we become more consistent in complying with screening recommendations. And that's at both baseline, where we're using pan-can prediction percentages, as well as the follow-up categorization that we're doing in our program. As with any AI tool, we need to make sure that we are aware of the risk of over-reliance on the AI output. We need to keep looking at the pictures, making our own critiques. We need to be aware of the risks of false positives and false negatives from the AI. And we may need to consider manually editing those nodule contours if we feel that they are not an accurate representation of nodule contour. How to critique an AI tool. The checklist or the framework that was presented tonight by Bruno goes through the general principles of how to choose an AI tool. These principles have been adapted by the ANSTA AI subcommittee for the NSCLP. It is not an exhaustive list. We are deliberately not going through different AI tools that are out there on the market. That's not really the role of the college here. But it is important to think about those principles when you are reviewing a potential AI tool for your organization. On that note, it's really important to make sure that you bring in all of the relevant stakeholders in your organization early in the piece. There will be clinical aspects in that checklist, and that's where the radiologists really get involved. There may be operational, such as the cost, and there will be certainly technical considerations as well, and that's where your IT team is really important to bring in for some of those items on the checklist. But don't be wowed by a really slick sales pitch. It's important to review the evidence that's out there in the literature with an impartial eye. That local validation of an AI or a CAD tool on your own cases that you expect to see in your own practice for the NSCLP is really important. If you're not sure what to do, reach out to a colleague, and there are many of us around the college who've had experience in this. Ask for some help. We'll all be very helpful, very happy to help address some of these questions, particularly if this is the first AI tool that you are thinking to implement in your department. There are some references here that are, again, really well written, and they really do talk about some of these strategies for successful deployment of AI in radiology. And I would strongly recommend that anybody who wants to do a bit more reading could try these papers. And that last paper I've just put up there, that last reference, is the ECLAIR guideline, which we used as our basis to edit and to make relevant to our own Australian NSCLP. Once again, and my thanks to Dr. Demuzio for putting together that really well put together framework. Just before we finish and go to questions, I just wanted to acknowledge that this has been a huge piece of work by a lot of people, not just in the ANSTA steering committee for the NSCLP listed there on the screen, but also all of the contributors to the ANSTA AI subcommittee. There will be a much more comprehensive document coming out in the next couple of months that we've all been working on. The college staff, Shelley Hansen, Liam Lyons, and Graham Taylor in particular, as well as the support of our radiology dean, Dr. Rajiv Ratan, and our collaborators at Cancer Australia and the Department of Health and Aged Care, all of whom have been incredibly supportive of this quite complicated process. And if you'd like to join ANSTA, if you haven't already, please do consider using the QR code on the screen. Now, that's the end of my presentation, Liam, so I might stop sharing and we can open up to any questions that have come through in the chat.
That's great. Thanks very much, Professor Jones and Dr. Demuzio. They were fantastic talks. We actually have a question from Xavier Yu in the chat. I'll read it out here. Regarding costs of implementing CAD and AI deployments, is there any estimates on the impact on practice given the MBS rebates are similar to that for CT chest studies that won't rely in the use of such tools? For example, not all sites already have CAD integration into CT chest studies for a start. And then to clarify his question, how many dollars per scan to implement basically?
I think this comes back to what I said about, not wanting to get down too much into the weeds of how this works, because that will be a different answer for every AI vendor. However, I will just mention that at RSNA 2023, I presented a talk about this exact topic, and we ended up presenting some data. Now, it was an in vitro study because we didn't have a lung cancer screening program operational at that time. And I won't say which vendor it was, but I think that no matter which vendor it was, the results would be very similar. Using a LungRads-based assessment, which is now in fact very similar to the follow-up CT reporting template that we'll be looking at in our own program, it saved approximately 8 minutes of radiologist time per case to do the report. And that included the detection part as well as the measurement part. It did not include the automatic population of reports. It also was noted that the radiologist was more accurate in coming up with a categorization for each nodule. And so it increased not just the accuracy, but also made the radiologist faster. So I'll leave you to work out how much 8 minutes of radiologist time is going to be worth in your organization. But we've certainly factored that into a recommendation for volumetry. It's not only the accuracy, but we anticipate that this would make the reporting process quicker. Bruno, did you want to add anything to that?
I don't think I have anything to add to that, actually.
Okay, we have another question from Anthony Felber. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hi, thanks for that very comprehensive look. I'm not sure how many people in private practice have been totally scared off by what you have presented tonight. There's a lot of resources needed, Bruno, to do go through the checklist. One would have hoped that we would be presented with 3 or 4 products which the NLCSP have accredited and said these are reasonable. And one would have hoped also that it would be mirroring the breast screen type approach where the quality assurance and accreditation is done by submitting data to the centralized accreditation group and then compliance in that way. It's just a lot of resources for private practices. And you think that most of the screening is going to be performed in private practice. Well, you know, I started sweating at number 4 of the checklist.
I think you have a very valid point. I don't know, Catherine, if you want to comment on why we haven't decided to propose particular tools. I think we have just put the foundations to enable people or institutions to choose. And because the scenario might be very different for a public institution that already has some sort of AI or a private practice that has a CAD, so it's not mandatory. And then I believe the sky is the limit. Like the tools can do different things, like can just be nodule detection. Some of them you do beautiful volume assessment, the volume comparison. Others will do pretty much the report template filled up for you. It's very hard. Like there's so many options in the market, and with the screening coming soon, like there are more and more companies coming to Australia and enable their tools through TGA. Catherine, do you have a comment on why maybe we should not have? We haven't recommended.
Well, I mean, the very simple answer is that if the program is seen to be accrediting or approving some products and not others, we need to be absolutely sure that we're pretty sure that that's correct. Now, it's also not in the business of the Department of Health and Aged Care to be accrediting companies that have already received TGA approval. Now, as Bruno's already said, not every product does the same thing. What you're able to do now is to look at what's out there on the market and assign them a yes or no based on what they're offering, and then to make up your own mind from there. What I will say as well, and Bruno's already alluded to this, is that more and more of the international companies who never before had a market in Australia are getting TGA approval in the first half of this year. And so whatever we said today would be out of date next month. And so again, you know, this is a pretty big process. As time goes on and models change as well, it's difficult to maintain an accurate register of performance. So for that reason, we're not going to go through different algorithms and say that they've been approved or unapproved, but hopefully there'll be enough out there in the literature that you'll be able to look up these products and to see, and to even just, you know, go around and talk to what other people are doing in their practice as well.
I was just thinking, sorry to come back to you, but to say that you don't have to approve a product, but you say, if you want to use AI in participating in the NLCSP program, it should have these parameters in the program, you know, A, B, C, D, E, and then they're reasonable for use. You don't have to particularly, it's just a minimum set of parameters for participation in the program.
So one of the things that we have been debating is putting out a recommendation for minimum accuracy, for example, in nodule detection, and estimates for what we would consider to be, you know, satisfactory sensitivity, specificity, and false positive rates. The problem with that, of course, is that it 100% depends on what your patient cohort looks like. And so we need to really be looking at the evidence in the Australian National Lung Cancer Screening setting before we can estimate what an acceptable percentage of all of those things would be. We can estimate them based on other national lung cancer screening trials, for example, but we don't have Australian data yet. So if I had the data, that would be fine, but we don't. We have to trust that the TGA has a level above which validation evidence must meet in order for it to be approved. And that's really the baseline premise, and that's why that regulatory clearance part is so strong.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. We have another question from Robin, if you want to work away, Robin.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's particularly what Bruno's done has been fantastic, you know, so give us a way to evaluate what's NAO program, and really appreciate what Catherine's done as well. My question is about the slowly growing nodules. You've talked about that it was an increase greater than 25% or volume doubling time greater than 600 days on more than one interval scan. What happens if it's only on the first interval scan? What do we do then?
So it has to meet both of those criteria to be called slowly growing. If it doesn't meet the criteria, then it's either considered to be stable or it's considered to be fast growing. And so, you know, it's whatever the category is that fits the best. So you do have different levels of growth based on multiple different criteria. The explanatory notes actually go through some examples as to what that could look like. But it can be difficult when you only have a 3-month interval scan, you know, between baseline and 3 months later, to be able to extrapolate, you know, a volume doubling time for very small nodules. And so for that reason, there is some leeway to say whether something is slowly growing or fast growing.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a few questions in the chat. One from Warwick Lee. Is there a coordinated QA program for radiologist performance, as in breast screen performance, that is cancer detection rate, miss rate, recall rate?
I'm going to say that that's probably not the topic for tonight's webinar. However, I can give you the summary answer to that is there is a QA program. It's not quite the same as in breast screening, where radiologists are given, you know, accuracy against other radiologists, but each radiologist will be able to, you know, download a log of their cases that they've received for the year through the National Cancer Screening Registry. But it won't be as rigorous a program as it is in breast screen, although it does differ between states in breast screen as well, I believe. It's still being nutted out exactly what the final QA program will look like for it.
Okay, the next question we have, thank you, is there a standardized protocol for scanning, and where would we find this? From Sheng Un.
So yes, again, there is definitely a standard acquisition guideline. It has been just validated this week, approved, I believe, and it should be put out as the final approved document sometime in the next couple of weeks. We have a committee meeting tomorrow with the Department of Health and Aged Care, Cancer Australia and other stakeholders, and we may be able to get the final sign off for that there. So it will be available very shortly, but in a nutshell, low dose CT, non-contrast, in supine inspiration, no expiratory or prone imaging, and there'll be some guidelines around, you know, recommended radiation dose limits over time.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. And we have another one. Jerry says, great presentation. Thank you very much. Do we expect the Medicare rebate for lung screening to be the same as a CT chest?
I'm going to say that is absolutely not the topic of tonight's webinar. And again, is still in process. Once we have an answer for that, we will certainly be letting everybody know. But that is still being debated fiercely at this point.
Okay, great. And we have another one from Anthony. Are all nodules tracked above a volumetric threshold or a maximum number like with TIRADS?
So the answer to that is yes, you do need to meet a minimum size criteria. I don't have that in front of me, so I'm loath to say what that number is. But last week's webinar, where we went through the nodule management protocol, goes through that in great detail. It's also really important to note that we only ask people to put in the 4 nodules at baseline, which are considered to be the most concerning. And so even though we have a minimum cutoff of roughly 4 millimeters diameter, we don't have to put in every one of the nodules that are present. Okay, so that's why we're using the PanCAN calculator to work out malignancy risk, and that will help us to, you know, decide which 4 nodules go into that template. So yes, there's lots of information on that that came out last week.
Great, and just a comment from last week's presenter, Sally Ayesa. She said that the QA and acquisition guidelines are covered in the 2nd online module, and they'll be available in the next few months. Okay, and I think that is all the questions from the chat so far. Is there anybody else who would like to ask Catherine or Bruno anything? Okay, I think we have one more. Shenyun asks, does the register allow for patients to move between different sites within and interstate for screening follow-up? Would we need to upload individual nodule images to the registry?
So in answer to the first part of that question, absolutely, the patients will be able to go between different radiology practices, whether it's within their own suburb or within, different states of Australia. So each patient or each participant, once they become a participant in the program, will have their own unique file within the National Cancer Screening Register. So that means that, if they go to a different place, 3 or 4 years later and think, oh, I'm pretty sure I've missed my screening, I keep getting these notifications from the screening register. Whoever is their GP at that point will be able to register them into the program under the same folder. In terms of whether we need to upload any images to the registry, that is, no, we won't be. We are, again, just working out what the digital data set looks like for what needs to be uploaded from within the radiology report, which will be a standardized template that we must all use straight into the register to try to minimize how much additional work the radiologist needs to do to put all of those fields in. So there's a lot of work going on. In fact, even just today, there was more work on this to try to make sure that this was as easy as possible for us as a sector to achieve, but there will be no uploading of images into the register.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine. I don't think we have any more questions as of right now. We just have 1 or 2 more slides from us. I'm just going to bring them up to finish us up, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, bear with me. Okay, so everyone can see this. This is just mirroring Catherine and Bruno's last slide. Basically, if we would encourage anybody who is interested in subjects discussed today to please consider joining Anster. It's really super easy and quick to do so, and it's lots of fun. Just a notification about the next webinar in the series. We'd like to remind you of the other webinars basically coming up, and that you can register for these on the Ransker NLCSP webpage. Here you will also find the links to the NLCSP workshops, which will be run nationwide, and the workshops will be arranged on a first come, first served basis. So the next upcoming webinar is webinar 4, Cultural Safety, being an effective ally for First Nations people, and it's scheduled for Tuesday, the 1st of April at 6:30 AEDT. So it's around a 6-week break between here and now. We have an excellent speaker, Mr. AJ Williams-Jen, so we'd really recommend all of you coming to that. For further information on future webinars, you can follow the webinar link, which is listed below here. And we just wanted also to point out we had an additional findings webinar scheduled for next Tuesday. That has now been rescheduled. The new date for the additional findings webinar is now Tuesday, the 29th of April. So it's almost 2 months' time, just to give everyone a heads up about that. And lastly, the CPD, most importantly. For Ransker members, CPD points for attending this webinar will be uploaded to your individual CPD profiles by the Ransker CPD team over the next few weeks. You do not need to do anything to claim CPD points. For non-Ransker members, a certificate will be distributed to each member as proof of attendance to webinars. Certificates will be distributed over the next few weeks, and a survey will be emailed out to all the participants who consented in the registration form over the next few weeks, and we would really appreciate it if you could give your feedback about the webinars. And finally, we would like to thank our presenters for taking time to be part of our presentation tonight, and we would also like to thank all of you for attending. The webinar recording will be uploaded to the NLCSP webpage on the Ransker website, and we hope you all have a good evening, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. And just a point to note, the acquisition guidelines have actually been uploaded onto the NLCSP website as well, just over the last day or two. So very, very recent. So if you want to check that out, please do. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Liam. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Catherine.